Amnon asked me to sort of chair, but I'm not the chair of the panel. Amnon is the chair from a distance, but I will introduce my colleagues to this panel, which is entitled Security Surveillance and Privacy. So we have Dr. Kenneth Geers, who's an ambassador for the NATO Cyber Center in Estonia and a visiting professor at the University of Kyiv. We have Professor Joel Reidenberg of the Fordham Law School, and Joel is also the director of CLIP, which is the Center for Law and Information Policy at Fordham. We have Mr. Braun, who is the vice president for business development at CYBERBIT. And we have Dr. Janet Hoffman, which is one of the directors of the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society, also known as the HIIG, located at the Bubbleplatz, at a nice, interesting location. And I'm Michael Birnhack from Tel Aviv University. And I'm not taking the prerogative. I'm listed first, so I'm not abusing anything here. Okay, so we are here to talk about privacy and surveillance, and more specifically I would like to talk about the limits of the law, which is especially relevant in the algorithmic state, or in the state of the algorithm, which can also be replaceable. Okay, so just to set the problem and where we are, this is, has been discussed in the previous sessions, so I need not emphasize and delve into the details too much. We have new security threats, and hence security needs keep increasing all the time. There are new tools of surveillance which are deployed all over our physical and virtual environment. And one of the new features is that surveillance and the security efforts are directed within, or applied within the population, within the citizens of the country, rather than, you know, spying after the enemy, which usually doesn't raise too many constitutional issues. When the government or law enforcement agencies conduct surveillance among its own citizens, obviously there are some human rights implications, privacy being chief among them. The Invisible Handshake is a paper written by Neva and me ages ago. Neva mentioned that. Actually, the title is Amnon's. He was the copywriter. And over there, we pointed to the handshake, the cooperation between public and private sectors, which enables the government to bypass constitutional guarantees. Privacy, as we know, and has been discussed in previous panels, is an ambiguous and contested, heavily so, but despite everybody who likes to say that privacy is dead, including Mr. McNeely and Mr. Zuckerberg, privacy is live and kicking. And technology, as we also heard in previous panels from Bracha and others, is complicated too, and one of the most difficult issues is that the technologies that we are discussing are often of dual use, meaning they can be used for good and bad uses simultaneously, which causes the problem. And of course, this is not new, but the internet at large is a distributed network. It's a global, anonymous, but de-anonymization is pretty easy, especially if you are the NSA, but also for others. So what do we do about that? The legal solution and the legal language, at least in Israeli law and also in European law and in American law also, but disguised in a different way, is that of balancing. We say, okay, we have here a special, pressing, urgent, governmental, public need, state interest on the one hand, and, you know, after 9/11 and after 7/7 in London and now after Paris and after Madrid, you know, yes, of course, there is a pressing national security issue. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, there's privacy. Let's balance. So Israeli law, European law says that explicitly. The Americans balance without calling it balancing through the categories and Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, etc. However, what we see, at least in Israeli law, is that Israeli courts, well, you know, they seem at first to be very favorable to the privacy argument, and they say something like, okay, for the sake of the discussion, let's assume that privacy is indeed violated. Now let's continue with the discussion, and they move on to issues of proportionality. It's, you know, if you're a privacy advocate and the court says, okay, I'm willing to take your point on this, let's move on, as if you're right on this, it, you know, you're very happy. However, it causes the court to balance national security against a black box. Privacy is not one concept. Privacy is a complex concept. It is composed of many details. And I think it's very difficult to balance, especially when you go down into the details, it's very difficult to balance something grave, important, national security, very concrete, not abstract claims, with something that you don't know exactly what it is. How can you say that this is the least offensive means that we found to address this issue if we don't exactly know what is the privacy harm? When the courts do reveal between the lines kind of the undertones, what they think of privacy, it's usually quite a narrow understanding of privacy. They often equate it with data leakage, issues of data security, and they focus on that. Instead of just blunt, as I described it, constitutional balancing approach, I think, and it's not, you know, it's not only my view, that, and this has been discussed in recent years quite extensively in various circles, is that the solution is not only the law, but a combination of law, technology, and in our case also organizational means, which comes down to PIA, PBD, and CPO. So, whoops. So PIA, Privacy Impact Assessment. The idea is, just like in environmental studies, before we have a new building project, study the issue and study the privacy implications as best as you can ex ante, rather than wait until everything is done and then say, oh, we didn't think about that. It means that we have to understand that privacy is not just data security. Privacy is a much richer concept than that. To better understand what exactly is at stake, we should follow the data's life cycle, from collection until the death of the data. And as we know, sometimes the data can reappear and re-emerge, and there's the resurrection of the dead data. FIPS, the famous, notorious fair information practices, can indicate the kinds of privacy harms that might be at stake. Consent, that is one of the FIPS with all the problems, but it indicates that there are human beings there and we should respect their privacy and ask, what do they want to happen, that will happen or not with their data? In other words, control, the data subject's control over his or her data. Issues of choice also reflect the issue of human dignity and control. Collection limitations, such as those that we find in the European Directive of '95. Use limitations, such as purpose limitation use. You know, you can use the data only for the purpose for which you have collected and received the consent of the data subject for. Then we have the emerging data protection toolbox, issues that are being discussed in Europe for the last few years and seem to happen actually now. For example, issues of accountability, transparency, not of the algorithm in this case, but of the what's going on. Data breach notification, which is actually an American idea that crosses the ocean to Europe, and the issue of deleting data, the right to be forgotten, which has also been mentioned. Other than these more concrete features of data protection harms, which should be examined in a PIA process, a privacy impact assessment, there's also the general feeling of surveillance. And that is easily brushed off in the constitutional balancing issue. let us remind ourselves with all the metaphors of non-democratic countries. They are all about surveillance. So obviously it's Big Brother, but it's the KGB and the Stasi and the Securitate in Romania and what have you. Okay, the first image and characteristic of a totalitarian country regime is lack of surveillance. People just don't like being watched, whether they have something to hide or just whether they want to go about their regular daily lives. CPO, Chief Privacy Officer. It's an organizational solution, but if it is required by law, it is also a legal solution. So, over the last 15 years, we see the emergence of this new profession. By now, there are something like 25,000 people who say that their profession is to be a chief privacy officer. That's a substantial number. The guy has a nice sign on his or her door where it says CPO. Everybody asks him or her what exactly that means. They say something. The next day, the same thing. On the third day, they have to start doing something. And eventually, they do something. The skills required from a CPO is a combination of law, but it shouldn't be the legal department, or not only. Also technological skills and organizational skills. Ken Bamberger and Adrian Mulligan have published this book, Privacy on the Ground, for those on my friends on the panel who can't see it, it's on the screen. They studied the emergence of the profession of CPO over 6 different countries, America and the US and European countries, and they came up with some conclusions and suggestions. They say that the CPO should be, that position should be a high level or deserve high level attention on the board. In other words, the CPO should be part of the management, not just the IT guy or someone in the legal department. The CPO should participate in all discussions. He or she should be powerful rather than just, the IT guy. And they should combine what they are doing with PBD, which is the next topic. We find occasionally CPOs in the government or in agencies. So the much disputed Israeli biometric database under the biometric database law, as its short name is, includes the position of a data protection of a CPO. That's thanks to Yoram and Amit in their previous roles, not thanks to the Ministry of Interior. In some other cases, we also see a project-specific CPOs, then they can make a difference, at least potentially. Plus, we see more and more CPOs in corporations, and if people want to take their job seriously, which I believe most people most of the time want to do, such a CPO can start doing things. He or she will look into the practices of the organization and ask, are we collecting personal data? Okay, yes, we do. Which information? Do we need it? How are we using it? What are we using it for? Are we transferring it? How are we protecting it? Various mechanisms will immediately come to mind. PBD, Privacy by Design, the brainchild of Anne Kvokian. Everybody knows that, although some think that the Dutch was rather Dutch constituency. Some think that she's not alone in that, but by now it's pretty famous. The pretty famous 7 principles embed privacy into the design to begin with. That's the gist of privacy by design. It's a great idea. It's very intuitive to lawyers, much less so to people in the tech sector. There's some challenges. Let's do privacy and let's embed it into the design. Wonderful. What exactly is privacy? Some disputes there. We go to the businesses and we tell them, that means, for example, that you collect only the data that you need. And they will say, well, we have no idea what we need, hence we would like to collect everything we can. So it runs into some issues there. On the technological side, okay, it's a great idea, but what should I do? When I design my next system, tell me what to do, I will do it, but what should I do? And then there's a cultural issue here. What do engineers think about privacy? The answer, based on research I've conducted with my colleague Irit Adar from Haifa and Eran Toch from Tel Aviv, is engineers think very different things about privacy than regular, normal people. So in the literature, we see lots of hypothetical cases. Oh, privacy by design should have solved the problem, etc. But we see quite a few success stories, at least in the private sector. Here's an example of a private-public issue. Body scanners of this kind were installed in American airports for quite a while. You would go and you stand in the position that most of us by now are familiar with, in front of huge blue boxes. And someone somewhere would see everything, okay, including scars and, of course, some other more intimate issues. If you get closer, you can see on this image too. Nobody thought about privacy when they designed this system. This system is no longer, you can no longer find this system in American airports, or at least that's what they say. It was replaced, or had to be replaced, with this, which I'm not sure how much you see, but this is the same body scanner, just designed with privacy in mind. Instead of showing the exact contours of the specific naked body, there's a generic figure, so you can't see if the person is short or tall, fat or thin, or some other more intimate issues. But if the person carries an unidentified object on his leg, that's the yellow box over there, that will, they will see that, and then the security guys can do whatever they have to do to further inquire whether that's a bomb or just, something that someone left in his or her pocket. Had they thought about this, the company that made this would still be in business. It's no longer in business. The transition, obviously, to this technology cost everybody involved a lot of money and a lot of privacy in the meantime. Public bodies, this is a study I'm just beginning with a colleague from University of Ryerson in Toronto, Avner Levin. Maybe privacy by design might be a bit more successful in the governmental sector. In the governmental sector. So we will be looking at some case studies. In Canada, issues of surveillance in mass transit systems, or a scheme applied in or by or together with the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, which applies issues of facial recognition, biometrics, very sensitive, in casinos with the idea of identifying addicted gamblers. It's with their consent, okay? But their consent is complicated. Smart meters, we might be looking into that. And one of the Israeli case studies that we will be looking at is the issue of the primaries regulations. As you know, the parties, the political parties, they have their lists, the database of people who have registered to whichever party, and every once a year or every now and then, especially before elections, they want to make sure that their databases are up to date. People changed their names, got married, divorced, so they changed their names, they changed address, some people died. They want to update their databases. How was that done up until recently? They would get a copy of the National Population Registry. Surprise, surprise, 2 minutes later it was online and available in various places. What do these regulations suggest and require? Something quite, it's so intuitive that in retrospect it looks like a no-brainer. Instead of the parties getting a copy of the registration, the population registration, the parties will hand over their database to someone objective who has no political interests, hopefully, and they will do the job for the parties and give them back only their databases updated without giving them excessive data which they don't need. This might not be the ideal solution either, but it is by far better than the previous situation. The Ontario Lottery, in order to identify an addicted gambler who comes and says, help me, I'm addicted, I can't, whenever I see a casino, I go there and help me not going into there, block my way. You need authentication, you have to verify the age, you have to exclude those who do not, the gamblers who wish to participate in that. There are some risks once such data is collected, and they came up with a comprehensive project which tries to do both, and that is one of Kevokian's principles. Let's achieve whatever goal we need, help the addicted gamblers, protect national security in airports like the body scanners, etc. But let's try and do that as much as possible with protecting privacy. If we go back to the balancing, which happens, let's think how an Israeli court would approach the issue of the body scanners under the first generation body scanners. It quite likely would have said something, okay, we assume that there are privacy breaches here. Now let's see national security, privacy, and the result would quite likely be in favor of the national security. If, on the other hand, the court would, with the assistance of the parties, would say, okay, let's try and figure out what exactly is the privacy harm. Is the privacy harm the fact that there might be a database of naked people or pictures of naked people? That's one risk. Maybe the risk is that, privacy serves as a buffer to protect other rights. So people with breast implants, either due to cancer or due to some other surgeries, will not be mistreated just because of that, and privacy can help. Maybe we have a solution for that which will not harm the privacy of the person. Maybe the issue is just I am standing in front of the machine like that, I'm dressed, but I know that someone is watching at my naked, the feeling of being uncomfortable, the issue of surveillance. Once we better understand what is going on, a PII, a privacy impact assessment, which is not only technical, it has to have a social input into it, then we can better tailor solutions to the issues. And we can also know, okay, here's an issue which we haven't yet found a solution for. Hence, we have to make a decision. We have to balance, we have to trade off. And then we can make a decision, and if we give up some privacy, we will say, okay, on this element, we are giving up privacy, we are trading it off, but we are doing that for a better cause. We regret doing this, but we have no choice because. Okay? A PBD approach would enable such things if coupled with a good privacy impact assessment, technological, sociological, legal, administered by a powerful enough chief privacy officer. That's an organizational response. All of that might improve things, at least somewhat. Privacy by design by the government. Avner and I, we think it has better chance than PBD in the private sector. And that is because the government has, better tools to know what privacy is. It can employ scholars from the social sciences, from various other sciences that are relevant. The government doesn't have commercial interests, so it doesn't want to waste our money, but it doesn't have commercial interest in the same way that a private company does have. These are internal motivations for the government that make it a better candidate to actually conduct a privacy by design approach. On the external level, the government and its agencies are subject to administrative law and to constitutional law, in other words, to Amnon. And they have to be accountable, and they have to be transparent about what they are doing, and they're subject to judicial review of various kinds. And they have to explain, unlike a private company, which at most has to explain to the public if there's a public outcry exposed after something bad in terms of privacy has already occurred. These are some of the articles that discuss some of the issues, the privacy by design in the first, the body scanners in the third, and the third in the second, and the third is yet to be researched and written. But at some point it will show up. Thank you. Ken.
Hello, It's a pleasure to be here. Many thanks. I don't have any slides, so I'm going to do Italian PowerPoint today. You can look at me. So I thought, while I was thinking about this conference, I'm very excited about it because, well, I don't know. I've spoken, for instance, at Black Hat and DEF CON a lot in Las Vegas, and in 2007, for example, I just threw it all out and I said, I just want to talk about human rights at DEF CON and Black Hat. And so I took the bottom 10 countries in the world and I did a study on them. You know, I did Iran, Zimbabwe, Turkmenistan, China, and basically looked at what was going on there in terms of human rights, the connection between network security and national security, but internally. So I have a healthy interest in this subject, and I have 20 years in government between 93 and 2013, and over time I sort of grew a little bit more suspicious, but actually when I started in government, at NCIS anyway, my first boss, he told me on the first day, he said he didn't trust cops, right? So don't trust us, basically. But it's a little bit, I just thought I'd talk about a little bit about my background. So because I spent 20 years relatively in some kind of signals intelligence, counterintelligence analysis, and specifically cybersecurity writing and research. So I just thought I'd share reflections on what I have learned. I have a couple of degrees in international relations, and I traveled a lot as a backpacker when I was a kid. So I spent at least a couple of years in Israel between 88 and 93. I was wandering around and I wound up on a moshav near Jericho. And then I went to Kibbutz Gadot in the north, and then to Moshav Lachish in the south. Then I went to university, Hebrew University, later in Jerusalem. So it's very nice to be back. Thank you very much for